If you're a Final Fantasy fan, then you know the name Sid. A hallmark of the franchise, Sid has appeared or at least been mentioned in almost every piece of Final Fantasy media since his introduction in Final Fantasy II. Square even made it a point to make a reference to Sid in the remake of the original Final Fantasy. He's become that much of a staple. And while his personality varies greatly between games, he is almost always a talented engineer and generally connected to airships. Sometimes a hero, occasionally a villain, Sid has become a welcome presence in every new Final Fantasy entry. So it's perhaps unsurprising that Tetsuya Takahashi and his team at Monolith Soft would have their own Sid. After all, they did break away from Square and had worked on past Final Fantasies. But you can find out more about that in my Xeno retrospective. Hint hint, plug plug. Anyway, Xenoblade Chronicles fans likely know where I'm going with this. It's pretty obvious at this point that Vandom has become the series' very own Sid. He first appeared in Xenoblade Chronicles X, then again in Xenoblade 2, and once again in Xenoblade 3. And you might think that's all there is to it. But you'd be wrong. His first appearance was much earlier, as he's as old as the Xeno series itself, making it fascinating to see how much stayed the same and how much evolved with each new entry. He first appeared in Xenogears, though he was not known as Vandom, even in Japanese. His name was Vandercam, or Vandercam when localized into English. He's an antagonist that's part of the Eva military, though he heavily favors large powerful cannons over mechs, or really any kind of strategy. This leads to demotions and his eventual defeat at the hands of the heroes. But Vandercam did establish many constants for the character. He's a military man and typically has some kind of facial marking. In this case, it's the purple cross on his face. And while it's never been officially confirmed, the name Vandercam is thought to come from the actor, Jean-Claude Van Damme. It seems pretty obvious though, considering that his name now is basically just Van Damme squished together. So Xenogears wasn't exactly the most auspicious start for the developer Sid, as outside the design, the character isn't especially memorable. But something about him stuck out, as Vandercam was lifted almost wholesale into the spiritual successor to Xenogears, Xenosaga. And this time he was named Vandercam in both Japanese and English, and kept his military station. He's first met as a crew member of the ship where the game begins. There he berates a group of underlings, calling them slackers, which itself might be a callback to Vandercam. There he called his crew morons for talking back to him, but that could be a translation choice, especially because berating underlings was common for him in these early appearances. He even goes so far as to strike them for messing up. Appearance-wise, he mostly looks the same as Vandercam, though the facial tattoo is now an X rather than a cross. But Xenosaga established some of the early constants of the character. He's still in the military, he has a facial tattoo, he's a hard ass who will hit his underlings while calling them slackers, and at least so far, he's an enemy. It turns out he's an undercover agent for the UTIC organization, which eventually puts him in direct confrontation with the party. This culminates in him attempting to use a giant cannon in Xenosaga Episode 2, which ultimately fails. While his fate is unknown, he's presumed dead as he doesn't appear in Episode 3, so we can chalk death around cannons as another early common element of his. But it's with Xenoblade Chronicles that the modern Vandom began to take shape, and that starts with the name. While he was called Vanguard in the English localization, in Japanese he was named Vandom, meaning he has maintained the same name since this point, just like Sid. But there were elements that were pulled from the Xenogears and Xenosaga continuities. Colonel Vandom is a drill sergeant-like presence in Colony 9 who berates his subordinates and calls them slackers before hitting them. So that definitely carried over from Vandercam. He also has his proclivity for all-out attacks rather than thinking of any kind of strategy, often at the risk of his own health. However, he is no longer an antagonist and actually survives the events of Xenoblade Chronicles. While he lacks the facial tattoo of the Vandercams, his ridiculously large mustache could be seen as a kind of replacement. But there is one more connection between Vandercam and Colonel Vandom, their voice actor, at least in Japanese. In both games he was voiced by Nobuhiko Kazuma. However, this would be the last time Kazuma would voice the character. Xenoblade Chronicles X marked the first time the Vandom name was used in English, and marks a shift in Vandom's general attitude. He was still a part of the military, specifically the player's commanding officer. While he had a tough exterior, he never beat or berated the people under his command. His strategic capabilities had also evolved beyond hitting them hard, making him seem like a valuable member of the organization. Commander Vandom's appearance also stuck closer to the Vandom from Xenoblade 1. He doesn't have a facial tattoo, but he does have a prominent mustache. It's a way of always having something up with his face. That brings us to the Vandom of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. A mercenary based within the Titan of Araya, this may be the most beloved version of the character. He's all about the tough love of the previous Vandom, but in a much more fatherly and empathetic way. He's a standout character with some of the best moments in the story, but that's something that should be seen for yourself if you haven't already. What's fun about Mercenary Vandom compared to the previous incarnations is his scar, an X right across the forehead. It brings him more in line with the Vandercams of the pre-Xenoblade games that favored tattoos over big mustaches while still being unique. But there's also a legacy to this Vandom. In Japan, he's voiced by Tessho Genda, who also handled the character in Xenoblade Chronicles X. And while he wasn't the voice of Colonel Vandom, he did play Zord in the original Xenoblade. Besides, Genda is still voicing each new Vandom at this point as he portrays the latest in the line, Guernica Vandom of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And I'll leave it at that because even I don't know much about this character as I'm still working through the latest game. But what I can tell you is that he seems to be in some form of military and that the voice tradition has carried over into English as he's once again voiced by Simon Thorpe, who also handled the character in Xenoblade 2. The Vandom of this game also carries many of the physical elements of past Vandoms thanks to a scar on the face as well as facial hair. He's kind of a culmination, almost like the rest of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. But there you have it. Vandom really has become Tetsuya Takahashi's Sid and even seen a similar trajectory, as each game gave him a bigger role and molded the character into what he's become today. He's a fan favorite and I'm curious what shape he'll take in future Xeno games. Of course, if we ever actually get that Xenoblade Chronicles X sequel, we definitely know what we're in for. Still, I thought it was something fun to look into and I hope you all did too. So which one was your first Vandom, and which is your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and as always, please consider subscribing to Good Vibes Gaming, hitting the like button, and ringing that bell. We also have a Patreon over at patreon.com/gvgaming with plenty of extra perks. Until next time, bye!